Good morning, everyone. Welcome to California Nonprofit Equity Initiative webinar. My name is Ling, and I'm the Membership Director with California Association of Nonprofits, Cal Nonprofits for short. Next, to kick off the webinar, I would like to introduce Jen Masaoka, Cal Nonprofits CEO and our moderator for today. Take it away, Jen.
Thank you, Lynn. I just want to encourage people, if you're at one, we're exactly at 11, and, in a real life meeting, you can be late, but I guess you can't on webinars. So, we're very fortunate today. Our first speaker is going to be Assemblymember Greg Hart. And I'm sorry, I got that wrong. Senator Tom Mumberg is our first speaker. Is that right? Okay. Oh, Assemblymember, we weren't expecting you can you give us five more minutes and come back?
Sure. Okay, absolutely, no problem.
All right, thanks. All right, so Senator Tom Mumberg is our first speaker, and we're going to go straight to him early. Then we have some kind of opening comments to make, but after our first two elected officials. So just to say something about Senator Mumberg, he's from Orange County, and he is the author of one of the 7 bills in the package, which is Senate Bill 336, which requires the state to pay indirect cost rates in line with federal indirect cost rates, which is in effect means an increase in indirect cost reimbursement for nonprofits. And Senator Mumberg brought this bill last year and it got stalled. And this is how much he cares about it, that he's brought it again and fighting for it again. So thank you very much, Senator Mumberg. Let me hand it off to you.
Hi, hi, Gian. How are you? So thank you for including me. I think I just signed on, and did you just hand it over to me? You did, okay.
Yes.
Well, thanks. Thanks for including me. I don't need to tell this group that nonprofits are the backbone of California, that nonprofits perform more in the way of service to the people that we care about than any other organization, including governmental entities, whether it's during the COVID crisis or a crisis that's created by other natural events, wildfires, flooding, snow, all those things. And so we need to, and we must support nonprofits to the extent we possibly can. And one of the challenges is, as I understand it, that nonprofits have, is not being reimbursed for their indirect costs when they receive a state grant, whether that be transportation costs, administrative costs, whatever those may be. In SB 336, we've introduced that to make sure that nonprofits are indeed reimbursed for their indirect costs as well. Thus far, the bill is doing well, but we could use some help. We need people, we need our supporters, we need your supporters, we need all Californians to weigh in on SB 336 by contacting their local member of the Assembly or local senator to encourage them to support SB 336 so that nonprofits are basically reimbursed for the expenses that they incur serving the people that we know and support and love. So thank you, Jan. Thank you for all your good work.
Thanks very much. And I know you had to step out of a committee meeting to speak to us today. So thanks very much for that. Take care and thanks for coming.
Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much, Senator Mumberg. So this is a busy day in Sacramento with a lot of legislative hearings. And so I want to say that that's why we're kind of doing things when people are available on. Assemblymember Greg Hart is one of those people. So just to say a word about him, he's new to the legislature and he's very brave because he's taken on a very complicated and very crucial issue by introducing AB 590 related to advance payments. And I think everybody knows that if you hire somebody to build a house for you, you can't wait until the house is done to start paying them. They have to hire people, buy lumber and all those kinds of things first. But in fact, that's the case. We're often in a situation we're often in nonprofits. For example, I'm on the board of a statewide childcare network, and the state has just asked us to take on a new project, but it's going to require $6 million for us to put out before we are able to receive our first reimbursement payment. So thank you very much, Assemblymember Hart, for bringing this up. And let me turn it over to you to share some remarks with our audience.
Well, thank you, Janet. Thank you for the kind introduction. It's nice to follow my wonderful colleague, Senator Umberg, and I'm just thrilled to be with you today. I have been working in local government for a very long time, and in my career, I've worked for local nonprofits, and I've worked in the childcare profession, worked on the government side. So I also know how critically important the work that you do, running nonprofits and organizing the staff and the people and getting the contributions from philanthropic people in our communities to leverage the public dollars and make your work just that much more impactful, how important that really is. And I think that too often government doesn't consider how important the partnership is with nonprofits. So I'm really thrilled to be a partner with Cal Nonprofits, working together with my colleagues on these 7 important bills as part of the California Nonprofit Equity Initiative. As Jan described, my bill, AB 590, will allow nonprofits to receive advance payments for their services rather than relying on the reimbursement model that's been in place for a very, very long time. And the premise that the state of California should be loaning money to nonprofits, or excuse me, nonprofits should be loaning money to the state of California is absurd. What are we doing here? We're trying to use the skills and the contributions and the abilities of local nonprofits to provide services in a really efficient way to our local citizens. We want to empower that. We want more nonprofits to be eligible to receive state grants, not make it tougher and more difficult, and oftentimes even require nonprofits to go out and seek loans to be able to advance the resources that they need to provide those services. So I think it's a big bill. I think it's a really important bill. It's getting tremendous response. Every time I have a committee hearing, I've got new co-authors that want to join in. So there's momentum. The biggest hurdle, of course, is going to be the state budget problem that we're having this year. It's a very large deficit. And I'm concerned that the administration may score this bill as having a significant fiscal impact, which is kind of short-sighted, I think, because ultimately these funds are going to be dispersed to the nonprofits. It's really just a question of timing. It's more of an accounting cost than an actual cost. So I'm hoping to work with the governor's office and the administration to find a path to success. And the work that you're doing to support that is critical. So everything that you can do to communicate with all of your allies and supporters here in the legislature and the governor's office, we'll just keep working and keep being persistent, because this is a very important cause and I'm committed to following through. So thanks again. The next hurdle we have is at the Assembly Appropriations Committee. And I've met with Chair Holden to talk about the bill and really express my enthusiasm and support for it, and how high a priority it is for me. So I'm hopeful, fingers crossed. Let's all just keep working together, and thank you again for all the very hard work you do in support of our communities.
Thanks so much, Assembly Member. Thanks for joining us. I'm thinking that everybody should realize that this is the fact that members of our legislature are walking out of committees to come talk to us is really a signal that we nonprofits have gained a lot more clout and a lot more respect in the California legislature than we had just a few years ago. So I'm very happy that and we have one other elected official who will be here joining us later. So I want to make a couple of overall comments just to frame the situation for folks. And our elected officials, like the people we've just talked to, but at all levels, city, county, state, and federal, are under a lot of pressure to accomplish things for California, whether that's in homelessness, in child poverty, in climate change, in wildfires, in healthcare, in the arts, and care for the elderly, right? There's a lot of promises and a lot of hope about government changing things. And the reality is when they say they're going to change things, they mean we're going to ask nonprofits to change things. The fact is that, nonprofits are the supply chain, the backbone of services for California's communities. So for us to do that work that we want to do, that we care about, and that elected officials and others need us to do, and that our communities are expecting us to do, we can't continue to suffer with the same kind of inadequate funding, late payments, and truckfuls of red tape that make it almost impossible for us to do the job that everybody needs and wants us to do. And in particular, we see a lot of our members are turning down opportunities to do new work because the terms of the contracts that they're being offered are so impossible that they know they can't do them. So, but just one example, right? Wages that are built into government contracts that are so low that it's impossible to attract workers for them. And if we're going to do something about homelessness, we need to be able to hire caseworkers, as just one tiny example in our whole nonprofit community. And so who are really the people that get hurt? I mean, as a former CFO, I know one group of people that gets hurt, and that's the finance staff, because we're always just tearing our hair out, going crazy with stuff. But I'd say the real people that suffer from the contracting problems are people in disadvantaged and marginalized communities. And by that, I mean really clearly rural communities, poor communities, and communities of color. So that's why these bills seem technical, but they're really a matter of statewide equity and really more urgent than I think their technical nature might lead people to think about already. So more than 350 nonprofits have already signed on to support these 7 bills. As you see, 6 of them have already gotten through their first committees, all of them with unanimous votes. So that's a positive sign that there's a lot of support in the legislature. But I think Assemblymen expressed it very well. There's a lot of hurdles given the Appropriations Committee and the upcoming revision of the governor's budget. So just by joining this webinar and also making some comments, I hope in the chat box, you're actually joining our California nonprofit community that is mobilizing itself to work on these really important contracting reforms. So later on, we're going to hear from another elected official, but first I want to introduce our new policy director, Catalina Sanchez. She's based in Sacramento and she has a lot of policy experience, but she's also an elected official herself. She's on the city council of her hometown, Gridley. So she's going to give a quick recap of each bill and where we stand with each of those bills so that you, because as part of our insider community, we want to make sure that you understand where each bill is. And in particular, you know, what we need, the next steps in our advocacy work. So off to you, Catalina.
Thank you.
Oh, just one more thing. Everybody should be writing your questions in the Q&A box or in the chat box, please.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. And thank you, Jan, for that great introduction. Again, let's go ahead and do a great dive into the update as to what Jan was saying. We have an incredible bill package of 7 bills in what we're calling our Nonprofit Equity Initiative. 6 bills have passed out of their respective policy committee, as Jan noted, and those 6 are also currently sitting in Appropriations Committee, either in the Assembly or the Senate. What this essentially means, the California legislature calls the suspense file, is that any bill that costs more than $150,000 is placed on the suspense file. The importance of today, again, is for our ask and advocating for all 6 bills to proceed to a floor vote in either the Assembly and the Senate. So to begin, we have AB 885 by Assemblywoman Luz Rivas out of Los Angeles. We have called this our Fairness and Contracting Bill. This requires the state to pay nonprofit partners the full cost of delivering programs and services, including administrative costs like fair wages and benefits. This bill had been referred to Accountability and Administrative Review Committee in the Assembly, but there has been a need for more conversations, and AB 885 has now been placed on the a 2-year bill category. So moving on to AB 590 by Assemblymember Hart, which he just gave a great explanation as to the great need for AB 590. I just want to add to that this bill is also co-sponsored by the United Ways of California and the California Council of Community Behavioral Health Agencies, or CBHA. And to highlight again, this bill currently sits on the Assembly Appropriation Suspense file. Moving on to AB 619 by Assemblymember Vince Fong out of the Bakersfield area. This bill is their Flexibility Joint Emergencies Bill. So under this bill, similar to the changes that the OMB instituted during the early days of the pandemic, this bill would allow for the changes in the way that services are done during declared state of emergencies, such as delivering meals rather than congregate meals, or for line item changes such as moving funds from vacant position to buying masks. And this bill got voted out of Assembly Emergency Management Committee by 7-0 votes. And again, this bill is sitting on the suspense file. Moving on to AB 696 by Assemblymember Lowenthal. This modernizes a lot of our processes. And by modernizing our processes, specifically what we're trying to do under this bill is move electronic payments and electronic signatures online, which would help reduce time and costs for both nonprofits and the state. This bill was voted out of Assembly Accountability and Administrative Review Committee by a 6-0 vote and currently sits on the Assembly Appropriation Suspense file. Assembly Bill 860 by Assemblymember Valencia out of the Anaheim area. As Jan noted, he will be joining us momentarily. And essentially what this bill is trying to do is streamline small grants programs. This would reduce application and reporting requirements for small grants of $20,000 or less. And this includes state grant programs administered by third-party administrators. The current status of this bill is that it did pass out of Assembly Accountability and Administrative Review Committee unanimously, and this bill currently sits on the Assembly Appropriations Suspense file. The next bill is SB 336 by Senator Umberg. And to add on to the incredible call to action that he did and the importance of his bill, this is against standardizing indirect cost coverage. I just want to highlight that this bill is also co-sponsored by the Rural Community Assistance Corporation and Self-Help Enterprises with strong support by Cal Nonprofits. This bill passed out of Senate Governmental Organization Committee unanimously, and SB 336 is currently on the Senate Appropriations Suspense file. And our last bill, SB 557 by Senator Limon, is our Equity and Prompt Payments Bill. Essentially, this bill is going to extend the state's Prompt Payment Act to all state contracts with nonprofits. It sets a minimum discrepancy amount of $250, removes the existing eligibility cap on nonprofit contracts, and includes any penalties to nonprofits in the required annual report. Current law is only applicable to 500,000 or less contracts, and under SB 557, we will raise that limit. This bill passed the Senate Governmental Organization Committee unanimously, and SB 557 is currently on the Senate Appropriations Suspense file. And I'll go ahead and check the chat if there's any questions.
Catalina, you said on a lot of the bills, you said it's in the suspense file. Can you explain what that is and how do things ever get out of suspense file, or do they get stuck there forever and ever?
Right. So there's a lot of interesting conversations that occur when a bill is on suspense file. To give you all some insight, what basically this means, as I mentioned earlier, any bill, regardless of the issue or the change that it's trying to make in the community or in the state, if it's totaling $150,000 or more, it automatically gets categorized as suspense. What this means is that it goes into a holding pattern where between the date it enters that committee until the final deadline, the constitutional deadline, which for this year, it's going to be the May 18th deadline. So by May 18th, that's where we'll hear essentially what we call the outcome of that bill. And what that means is within those couple of weeks leading up to that deadline, what that appropriations committee is trying to do is only analyze the fiscal impact. But what a lot of people actually know that process entails, it's more of like a filtering out. So regardless of the policy, they really do look at the fiscal impact, but also politically, there could be other implications, but appropriations committee does have a lot of power. The chairs of the committee also have a lot of power in deciding what continues to get out. And that's a term that you'll hear, what gets off the suspense file or gets to get out. And it's very crucial that a lot of people who care about the issue that their bill is trying to change really engage with the committee to make sure that they address any fiscal concerns. But again, it's simply another way to filter out bills that could be very costly. Politically speaking, if there's bills that require more of an in-depth conversation, there's policy changes that actually need to be made, Appropriations Committee, and specifically the suspense file, is a way for our legislature to really allow for further opportunities to have those conversations by way of really focusing on the fiscal impact to address that.
Thanks, Catalina. So it sounds like there's two kind of core ways in which things get out of suspense or stay in suspense. One is because it's been costed as being too expensive, or the other one is because of political opposition. And is there kind of a date by when things have to come out of suspense or they die?
Yes, so constitutionally, the deadline is going to be May 19th for this year. Every year, dates change. But what we can anticipate is usually that Thursday before that Friday deadline is when they'll have the suspense file hearing, and that usually will happen after floor session. So we can anticipate that happening Thursday, May 18th. maybe between the hours of 10 to 12 p.m. And for purposes of the Nonprofit Equity Initiative, I really highly urge our nonprofit ally supporters to contact their state legislators in Sacramento, specifically the chairs of Appropriations Committee in the Senate. We have Senator Anthony Portantino, and in the Assembly, we have Assembly Member Chris Holden. We urge you to contact them by Friday, May 12th. Some Sacramento intel, what we know is that over the course of that last weekend prior to that hearing on the 18th, that's when a lot of the decisions will be made. So we want to again urge that you reach out to your legislative representative by next Friday, May 12th, make sure that they hear from you, why you care about these 7 bills. And, we're really much hoping for a positive outcome on May 18th.
That's great, thank you. And this, that's one of the reasons we're having this webinar right now before that time, so that we can work on those things. And I know we've been working with a lot of the the staff in the legislature on the costs. And just like one sort of semi-funny example, one of the bills that we don't have the author here today from Monique Limon in Santa Barbara is one called Equity in Prompt Payments. And so, as most of you probably know, there's a cap right now on when on contracts of $500,000 or less, or the amount when the Prompt Payments Act kicks in, and the state is required to pay fines if they don't, in fact, pay nonprofits undisputed invoices on time. So we're talking about raising that cap. And one of the things that's come back to us from the analysts is, well, how much is this going to cost the state? And we had a really easy answer. Well, if they just pay on time, not a single cent. All right, so that's the kind of, that was one of the more fun discussions with the appropriations staff, but just to let you know about that. Are there any more questions? I know Lauren, who's our communications director, is monitoring the questions. Lauren, can you let us know if there's some more questions?
Yes, there are more questions. I think I'm here. Hi. Let's see. We have a question about defining the minimum discrepancy rate that's noted in SB 557. That's one question.
Catalina, do you want to take that one?
Yes. So in SB 557, one of the changes that we have made since the bill was introduced earlier this year is setting a discrepancy amount to being either $250 or 5% of total costs. So essentially, this should be able to kind of rein in and be a little bit more clear as to that specific minimum amount under this bill. Jan,
just to add an example, I know we talked to one child care center in Contra Costa, for example. They submitted an invoice. I'm sorry, this is an organization in San Diego, and they submitted an invoice that was 4 cents different from the amount that that month's invoice was supposed to be. And that made it held it up for 6 weeks while it was investigated. So that's why we proposed this idea of $250 or less, or 5%, whichever is less, so that if you're 4% off, the payment can go through and it can get worked out later, as opposed to being held up forever. And by the way, in that particular case, after the long investigation, they found out that the nonprofit was right, not the state agency. So great. Other questions, Lauren?
Yeah, I don't know if you want to answer this now. Is it likely or unlikely that all will pass, or just some? And do you have priorities?
Catalina?
Question. So our hope is that all 6 bills will move out of Appropriations Committee. Again, as we have been mentioning the importance of this webinar, and we urge that you continue to engage with myself, with Jan, to make sure that we do that advocacy work to get these bills off suspense. The more that your local representatives hear from you, specifically if any of you are located within the service areas of, again, Senator Anthony Portantino and Assembly Member Chris Holden out of the Pasadena area, we urge you to reach out to them, reach out to their district offices, which we will provide you with their contact information in the chat, and let them know that these bills are very important to the critical services and work that you all do in their districts. The more that our elected officials hear from us about why these bills really truly matter to the people that you serve, the more that they're going to say, hey, this bill is very important. There might be some issues, if there are concerns, that we continue to have that conversation and allow these bills to get off the suspense file and onto the floor of the respective house, and continue to have that engagement and this conversation to make sure that everyone hears from all of you. Thank you.
That's great, because one of the questions also asks what immediate steps are needed from the nonprofit community. So I don't know if there's anything else that you want to ask, or if we're going to talk about that again a little bit later.
Well, I think, well, first of all, I want to say one of the things you can do if you haven't already is to join the 350 other nonprofits that have signed on to support all 7 bills. And today you don't even have to go to our website for signing on. You just have to put your name and your organization and your email in the chat, and we'll sign you on. So please go ahead and do that. It will be fun to see more people signing on, or maybe all of you guys have already signed on. But I wanted to answer the second part of that question, which is there are some that are more important to us than others. And I have to say, nobody's asking us that question. We want all 7 bills to go through. Each one has a separate author. So this is a big advantage of having 7 authors instead of having one author in kind of a multi-component bill, right? Because that means that we have 7 individual authors fighting for their bills. And it shows kind of an overall effort as opposed to kind of just one bill among many thousands of other bills.
Okay. We also,
that Jennifer, who's our lobbyist, and other folks are adding in tips and stuff in the chat. So please go ahead and do that. And thank you, Karen, for signing on Buckaloo programs. Thank you.
That's great.
Questions?
Yeah. There's a question about the difference between signing on, that we're asking people to sign on to support the initiative, and also submitting letters of support to legislators or committees. What's the difference there?
So can you repeat that question?
Yeah, the question is, can you explain the difference between signing on to support the initiative, via the form that we're sharing with people, and also the difference between that and submitting letters of support to legislators or committees, and also what the implications are for nonprofits in terms of rules and limits on lobbying and advocacy?
Of course, great question. So the differences between whether it's a sign-on onto our letter, which would be a robust coalition letter, or what you'll hear in Sacramento talk being as the NASCAR letter, where you have all of the logos at the top. So essentially, you want to continue to be able to attack your advocacy from different angles. One of them is you want to have a large coalition letter that shows, hey, on this bill, AB 590, we have a large group of folks in support of this bill. You want to also be able to submit your own individual position letter of support as an organization. And what that allows you to do is, instead of having more of a broad advocacy, you're able to have more targeted advocacy. As was mentioned in the chat, what you're able to do, like for example, right now where we have these bills in suspense, you want to specifically target the chairs of appropriations. Right now, there are about 80 assembly members, you have 40 senators. So right now we don't need to target all of them about the bills being on suspense. What we want to do is really narrow our advocacy to the chairs of appropriations committee. So that's where the positive implication of you submitting an individual position letter of support would help target and really refine your energy towards that goal of getting these bills off suspense. So, little by little, we want to be able to bite off the apple. So right now, our priority and focus is appropriations. And the other part of the question, the implications, I don't think there's nothing negative about being able to utilize these different tools and resources to advocate for the organization that you're with, to advocate for these bills, because regardless, you want to be able to continue to have that momentum and put these bills on our appropriations chairs, but also your local elected officials. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, there's still a few questions. We'll have time later on. I want to hear from our 2 nonprofit speakers today, and just to say a couple of words about them. The first one is Karen Delaney. She's the executive director of the Volunteer Center of Santa Cruz County, and she's a longtime statewide and county activist on the issue of contracting. So she has been through the wars, and in particular, you may not know this about the Volunteer Center, but they do a lot of contract work related to disaster response, supporting families with members in incarceration, and other kinds of work that you don't necessarily automatically associate with volunteers. After she speaks, we're going to hear from Krista Colón of the California Coalition on Domestic Violence. And domestic violence organizations have been in the leadership of integrating service and advocacy for many years. And just as one interesting example, at the early days when shelters for battered women were first being opened, the women leaders who were running them discovered that it was not against the law at that time to hit your wife. So they immediately realized that they couldn't just serve nonprofit and serve women or help women, but they also had to stand up and change the laws for women. So I think I've always wanted to give a shout out to the domestic violence leaders of our state for doing that kind of work. So first we'll hear from Karen and then Krista. Okay, Karen.
Thank you so much, Jan. And I am super stoked to be doing this, even though we are still in a disaster activation with our Pajaro floods. Here's why. Whether, we're getting a lot of attention right now for large disaster activation, but no matter what your mission, some of the disasters we respond to are the ones that make the front page of the New York Times. And some of the disasters we respond to are those small disasters that happen in families, in homes, behind closed doors every day. And honestly, what motivates me to take time to do this is these 3 facts from us that I'm sure once I say them, you'll go, oh yeah, that is a bummer. What if when we're responding to disasters, we don't have to say no to money that we know is needed because we have no way to start up and wait for 3 months to be paid? What if the first $40,000 my agency raises every year doesn't have to be budgeted to pay loans to banks and interest on credit cards we max out waiting to be paid for the state? What if I could pay all of our staff a living wage, really, and we didn't have constant churn and turnover from people who literally cry when they leave us because they're tired of working 2 or 3 jobs? We do an amazing job. You do an amazing job out there every day. No other business is asked that does business with the state is asked to shoulder these kind of burdens. And honestly, if we could just take some time to take the the jobs we do are hard enough. We don't need to be carrying weight buckets to do them. So that's what I see. This is really, truly an equity initiative that will help us all every day when we're responding to big disasters, little disasters, when we're out there in the field. I would encourage you not only to sign on to the letter, but to activate your networks. Talk to everyone you know, get them to sign on to the letter. We got our board members to call our elected officials. I'm going to speak to the Democratic Women's Club because this would be a trend. Jan said it's a boring business practice, but when you stop and think about how many times are you in the middle of something that's really important, helping people, and you've got to drop everything to like literally take paper physically to a mailing center and send it certified mail, or literally call a bank or call a donor and say, our check is late from the state. We've got payroll next week. Can you send your donation earlier? If we all spend a little bit of time right now fixing these structural problems, equity at its heart is usually in part about boring structural problems around money. And nobody does a better job with money than us. Nobody needs these services more than our folks. And standing up and working a little bit for equity is an important thing. And I certainly hope, I know nobody's got a lot more on their plates than all of us, but now is the time to really spend a little bit of time between now and the 12th to do this thing that will help us all for the next generation. So that's why I'm excited about doing this and we'll keep working on it.
Thanks, Karen. I just love some of your phrases there. Nobody does a better job with money than us. I love that phrase. So we were going to go straight to Krista, but because Assemblymember Valencia is here, we're going to skip over to him. I just want to say a word about him. Assemblymember Avelino Valencia is new to the legislature from Orange County. He only took office in November, but right away he started hearing from nonprofits about the kind of paperwork that exists, even for really small grants. So in fact, we know that nonprofits that get grants, sometimes with as small as $1,100, are doing the same kind of paperwork for grants that are maybe $20 million. And so we're very glad that among the very first things he's doing in office is authoring and championing a bill to simplify processes for state grants that are $20,000 or less. And so many of our organizations get these kinds of grants, and this would just make it not only easier for us to manage them, but easier for more nonprofits to get them. So thank you for being with us, Assembly Member. Take it away.
My pleasure. Thank you, Jan, and good morning, everyone. That summary and of my background is short and sweet, and just like our legislative bill package that includes AB 860. Thrilled to carry this piece of legislation. I think it's a step in the right direction at a critical time when we're undergoing budget deficits. We need to ensure that the folks who already know how to be as efficient as possible when it comes to delivering services to our California residents have all the support that they need to make sure that those dollars continue to go as far as needed. My experience back home in Anaheim, Orange, and Santa Ana, which is the district I represent, goes without saying that the work that nonprofits do at that level and across the state is well known. And this bill, I've received a lot of feedback from local nonprofits, smaller nonprofits in particular, that this type of bill will make their process much more efficient and help them, again, deliver what they love to do, which is resources and services to our constituents. So with that, I really appreciate the opportunity to champion this bill. Currently, it is in appropriations. I've had very productive conversations with our appropriations chair, Mr. Chris Holden, and I am confident that the bill will continue to move forward and then on to the other house in the Senate. And once that takes place, we'll continue to encourage the administration to be supportive of this and make sure that we get this bill moving as quickly as possible and put into practice here early next year.
Thank you so much, Assembly Member. And it really means a lot to us that you stepped out of committee hearing to come talk to us. So thanks for coming, and good luck with whatever committee it is you're going back to.
My pleasure. Busy time up here, but definitely wanted to take a moment to join you all this morning. And thank you all for the work that you do. Be well.
Thanks so much. Okay, now we get to hear from Krista Colón from the Coalition on Domestic Violence. Krista.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jan, and always happy to follow actually my assembly member. I happen to be down in the district, and really want to appreciate all of Karen's words and passion on behalf of the nonprofit community and the work that her constituency and all of you do every day. As the statewide Domestic Violence Coalition, I have the great honor and privilege of working every day with domestic violence service providers all across the state, who range from very large organizations to very small, who are working to support survivors through some of the hardest moments in their lives, working to implement prevention efforts to stop violence before it ever occurs. And the work they do is hard. The work all of you do is hard, right? As a nonprofit sector, we take on some of the biggest, hardest issues that our state is facing. And the work is hard, but our grant management and our contracting with the states shouldn't be. And I think that's a real piece that motivates me to work on these bills. And I know several speakers have sort of referred to this as boring technical pieces. But I will tell you, is no surprise to this audience, the minute I mentioned this as an area of focus for the year, I heard immediate interest and passion from the executive directors and finance folks in our network, because these pain points are so present. And I think what's really powerful about this package of bills is the way that they can truly work together. The transformational impact it can have to be able to do some things that feel very simple in 2023, like using a digital signature instead of requiring a wet signature, so that you don't have to worry about being physically present or FedExing paperwork that needs a physical signature to someone to try to get that to then get to the state before a particular deadline. Using online invoicing and electronic payments. Imagine the stress reduction when you're not frantically checking the mail every day, waiting on 1 check, 2 checks, 5 checks from the state that can be tens of thousands of dollars or more to be able to meet your payroll. But to know that that money is going to be direct deposited into your account, will show up and be present for you to be able to pay those bills. Imagine what it can look like for your organization to be able to get an advance on those funds from the state, so that, as Assemblymember Hart spoke about, you aren't essentially loaning money to the state to be able to do the work that you need to do. I think the ability to adapt and have more flexibility in times of natural disaster and other emergencies is so essential. We have unfortunately seen throughout our network domestic violence shelters and the communities they serve be impacted by wildfires. We've been in close touch with our programs in the Central Valley as there's risk of flooding as the snowpack begins to melt in the Sierras. Right, we know that the communities you serve and the way you serve them shifts on a dime when it's needed. And we want to make sure that the state provides that flexibility when it comes to your funding. So it's hard for me to pick just one of these bills. I love all 7 of them, and really the work that together they can do to simplify some processes for the organizations that you all represent. Take some of those administrative burdens off of your shoulders so that you can focus the time and energy on serving your community as best, which is what you do. And I think these comprehensively represent just a great opportunity for the state to streamline, simplify, recognize the importance and value of all of our organizations to do the work that they do in communities every day. So really want to thank Cal Nonprofits for their leadership and the legislative offices who are carrying these, and appreciate the opportunity to speak about why this is so important to us in the domestic violence field to support the work that our local programs are doing, and that I know will be impactful for nonprofits serving all types of communities and needs in their areas.
Thanks so much, Krista. I really appreciate your bringing out some of the specifics of the bills, and just crazy things like we still are getting paper checks through the US mail instead of an electronic payment. That should be it's kind of ridiculous that we're even talking about that having to be a law. That should be kind of a duh, right? So, but also thank you for all the work that the coalition does. And, you know, for those of you who are listening, both Krista's and Karen's organizations have been very active among the 20 organizations that are part of the statewide nonprofit contracting coalition that are bringing these 7 bills and working them. And both of these individuals in particular have also spent a lot of time working on the details of particular language and given bills and possible amendments. So thanks very much. Okay. Lauren, do we have some additional questions for any one of the panelists?
No, we don't have a specific question for panelists right now. No, we have a couple questions from before. Do we have any? Anybody want to ask a question?
Well, I see one question. If a bill is released from the suspense file, does it automatically get for a floor vote? Catalina.
Hi, yes. So if a bill is released from the suspense file, is it automatically scheduled for a floor vote? Not necessarily. So there's 2 options once a bill is removed off suspense. The first option is if it was not amended during the committee. So when the committee made the vote, if you do not hear as amended, that means that essentially that bill will be available or eligible for a vote on that first date. So if the hearing happens on Thursday, and then the floor session begins the following Monday, a bill that has not been amended is eligible for a vote. If a bill is amended, there has to be about a 72-hour in print rule. So usually you have to wait until the following hearing. So if a bill is voted out on that Thursday and there's a floor session on Monday, then the bill would be eligible by Tuesday if there are amendments. So there is a rule that if there are any amendments, essentially the bill is then able to be voted on. And also some of the lingo that you would hear is that if you are looking up the bill, which I did drop some links in the Q&A, is that if a bill is on second reading, according to the bill history, then you know that it's not eligible yet. So what happens is the bill will get out of suspense. It will say either third reading or second reading. If it says second reading, it's not eligible for a floor vote. If it has third reading, it means that it is. And I did want to quickly pivot over. There was another question in the Q&A, and that question was, how do you know if a bill is on the suspense file? I did share some links that you can all put into your browser and look up the bill of interest. So say if it's AB 590, you can either look it up on the Public Legislative Information Systems website or LIS. Ledge info. And so you'll just put in the bill number and it'll show up the text, the vote, the history, bill analyses, and also on the history, that's where you can see if it says place on the suspense file. So that's one way. I also did provide each Senate Appropriations Committee and Assembly Appropriations Committee website. And I specifically included the links to the appropriations hearing section of the website. And also that's another way for you to look up whether a bill has been placed on consent. A lot of the committee websites have a lot of great resources for you to be able to know if a bill is on suspense, maybe when the hearing is going to be held, position letter submission, things like that.
That's great, Catalina. I dropped those into the chat also. And can you or Krista answer, what is the governor's likely posture towards this bill package? How likely is it he will support it? Good question.
Yeah, great question. And so some positive news is we have been engaging with the governor's administration. We've been speaking with other potential agencies and departments that are involved on any of these bills where they have oversight. We have been exploring a lot of different options. We want to just make sure overall our priority is to get all 6 bills across this year, if possible. We can't, it's like doctors, right? We don't want to make a guarantee that things are going to get there, but we're going to do and fight the good fight to get these there. Again, we have been in conversation with the governor's office. We have great support from our authors' offices and their staff to be able to work with Cal nonprofits. We have great co-sponsors on all of these bills, as we mentioned, that are also, Cal nonprofits is engaging with them. And we want to, again, make sure that we do as much as we can to get all bills across the finish line. Thank you.
Great. We also have a question about whether there is a similar. Go ahead.
I know you have something to add on to that. Can you speak to that as well?
No, I mean, I think Catalina covered everything. I'll just say that, right, bills like this are really focused on changes for the administration to make and state agencies. So that engagement early has been really critical. And I think that at times what can also be really helpful is continuing to lift up the ways in which these aren't necessarily new burdens. I'll share that some pieces of this we've been able to carve out specifically around a particular funding stream, for example, for domestic violence shelters, where there's an ability now for programs to get in advance of the full amount that the state provides. And so being able to point to examples where our codes may already be leading in this direction or providing these types of steps in certain areas that need to be expanded to cover all grants and contracts can be really helpful for administration engagement. And typically the governor's office tends to get more involved in bills as they head into the second house. So as the assembly bills head over to the Senate and vice versa. But I've really appreciated how intentional this coalition has been about reaching out to the administration early and often to start those conversations on this particular package, which I think can only serve us well.
Thanks, Krista.
Really quickly to add on to what Krista said, it requires a lot of conversation, but also, as I mentioned, we want to hopefully get all bills across, but we also need to think about the fact that this could be and is already a multi-year effort. As I mentioned earlier in the webinar, AB 885 by Assemblymember Luz Rivas, that has now become a 2-year bill. So we also, again, like I said, we want to continue to push for these bills, but also this likely is going to be a multi-year effort. And I know one question in the chat was about federal issues. Obviously, there's a lot of things that there's constantly movement at the federal level as well. And so anything that could happen federally may also implicate, right? Because we just don't know what the current climate is of our government, not just here in Sacramento, but Washington, D.C. You know, we could face another state of emergency. So we just need to be prepared for potentially multi-year efforts as well. Thank you. Thank you, Krista.
In addition to asking whether there's anything happening on the federal level, there's also a question about the work that's being done in LA County around contracting and whether there's any connection with our work, with our bill package.
I speak to that. There is a major multi-year effort going on in LA County with the Equity and Contracting Coalition, ECC, and many of our coalition members who are in LA County are active in that. Their focus right now is working on getting funding and approval for creating a new office within county government that would be central oversight for all the contracts across all the departments. So hopefully we'll see how that happens. And you know, here in California, actually, most nonprofits with contracts are getting those contracts through the counties. They're typically using state money, but it's being contracted through the county. And so that's why focusing on county issues is also incredibly important for community-based nonprofits. There are also similar efforts in other counties. Karen is part of the Human Care Alliance in Santa Cruz County that is working on these same issues there. There's a contracting coalition in Monterey, in many different of our communities around the state. Are there any other questions, Lauren?
Yeah, somebody asked whether smaller members with less bandwidth can track, don't have time to track these bills, and will we keep you updated? We will definitely keep you updated. I'm assuming that everybody here is on our mailing list. If you're not, you should subscribe, and we will regularly update you via twice a month newsletter, on our social media, on our website. We will keep you updated. Thanks for asking. Yes, Catalina.
Yeah, and I just want to add to that, as your new policy director, I want to feel accessible to you. I'll drop my email in the chat, but please feel free to reach out to me via email or give me a phone call or send me a text if you have any questions about the legislative process. We're also here to make sure that you understand the process so that you engage with it. I know for many people who might be new to Sacramento or advocacy, it could be intimidating, and it should not feel that way to you. We have a great team here at Cal Nonprofits. We want to make sure, again, that this process is very accessible to you and easy to understand. And essentially, there's no dumb questions. It could be very convoluted. There's constitutional deadlines and weird Sacramento lingo and culture, but I'm happy to help break that down for you and make you feel a part of it, because we definitely need your advocacy here in Sacramento. Thank you.
Thanks. And just to wrap up, as Catalina said, this is the time, and as Krista said, and Karen, this is the time right now, before May 15th or before May 13th, I guess, is really when we need to show a strong support for the bills getting out of suspense. And that's part of why it's so important for nonprofits to sign on. In a couple of days, we're going to be sending you the link to the recording of this if you want to send it around to other people, but also some specific information and messaging that you can easily put into emails, for example, or phone calls to some of the key players. I also really want to mention the fact that our ability to put on webinars like this, work with our coalition, bring on members of the elected members of our legislature, is really thanks to the fact that we have such strong financial support from Cal Nonprofits members as well. And so I hope that the main reason that they support us is because they're part of the nonprofit community advocating for change. But there are also a lot of other good benefits related to health insurance, for example, HR support and other matters. So I know that we'll also be sending you information about that. So again, if you're just going to do, never feels like there's enough time for advocacy. I'm sure it felt like that for the women doing those early women's shelters. but it's important for all of us. So if you can take just a couple more minutes right now and either sign on or let us know your email so we can sign on for you. And thanks very much for coming. And thanks especially to our members of the legislature and to Krista and Karen for being with us. And I hope now that you guys have met Catalina, don't you think she's awesome? So please make sure that we take full advantage of her abilities to serve all of our members. So thanks so much, everybody. Have a good lunch. Bye, everyone.